Let me welcome everyone to this second lecture by this year's Philippe Roman Professor in LSE Ideas, Professor Gilles Kepel from Sciences Po. It is a wonderful opportunity for us in Ideas and for LSE as a whole to have the person who is probably the world's foremost expert on political Islam in its various incarnations, both the way it has worked in the Middle East, how it's worked in the broader Islamic region, and how it's working in Europe, with us as professor this year. It's very clear that political Islam has emerged as the Cold War came to an end as one of the great ideologies of the modern world, in many different incarnations, in many different shapes and forms, very different in its implications for Europe, for North Africa, for the Middle East, for the Indian subcontinent, and for Southeast Asia. And it is variety in terms of ideology, in terms of the main issues that are put under debate within political Islam that Professor Kepel is going to talk about today. He's also going to address the issue of whether this is an ideological development that by necessity would lead to a conflict with the West, which is an issue that is of great consequence for how the international system is going to look in the future. It is a wonderful opportunity for us to debate some of the key issues that exist within international affairs, which of course part of the purpose for the setting up of LSE Ideas, to debate the broad issues and their consequences. So Jill, without further ado, we are looking forward to listening to your lecture today. Welcome again to the LSE on behalf of the whole LSE community. It will be a great pleasure to listen to this and to the next two lectures in this series. Jill, please.
Thank you very much, Arnie. Thank you for those of you who already came the first time, and welcome to those who come for this anew. Today we're going to go back in history a little, as opposed to what we did last time, and try to understand how the Islamic political system, if I may say so, sort of plugged in the world system in the 1970s and 1980s. And as Arnie just said, and he's of course an expert together with the co-director of Ideas, Professor Mick Cox, of the international system and of the East-West dispute. Let's see how the world sort of changed eras in the 1970s, and while Islam was to a large extent non-existent in the world system before the mid-1970s, how it became a prominent actor in this world system. That means that we have to define what we call Islam, and there are many contenders for that name. And in order to try to understand what it means, I think we have to go back to basics and analyze what happened on the ground. The reason why this lecture is called Jihad, after the book I published under that title in 2000 in French and in 2000, late 2001 in English, is that I believe that Jihad in Afghanistan in the 1980s was the watershed event that changed the whole issue of Islam on the political sphere. And Jihad in Afghanistan had a multifaceted dimension. It was something that its promoters, both petro-monarchies of the Arabian Peninsula and the United States, thought would be a key issue to undermine the Soviet Union, to topple the Soviet Union, so that they would have a proxy war against the USSR. And as a matter of fact, the Afghan Jihad ended on the 15th of February 1989 with the pullout of the Red Army from Kabul. And when we think of 1989, we usually think of the fall of the Berlin Wall, but my contention will be that without the defeat in Afghanistan, there would have been no exposure of such, there would never have been such an exposure of weakness on the Soviet bloc, and Gorbachev would probably have had more cards in his hand at the time. So it was a key issue for this proxy war against the USSR was a key issue for the West. It was the Vietnam in reverse, if you wish. But by the same token, it opened the Pandora's box of radical Islam that led to 9/11. And to a large extent, the soldiers that the US did not send to the field in Afghanistan, the soldiers that and the money they did not spend, well, came back with a vengeance on 9/11, and the destruction in New York and Washington, to some extent, where this was the freedom fighters' chicken that came home to roost. Something which was not entirely clear, and I believe in the minds of many analysts of that period. So we'll try to center today's lecture on this issue of the jihad in Afghanistan, and both in its international and domestic dimension. And in order to put it into perspective, let me very briefly give you some background elements on how this whole thing started. The upsurge of political Islam in Middle Eastern, North African, and then South Asian and Southeast Asian, and later on Central Asian countries, not to forget the outskirts of major European countries, from Bradford to Aubervilliers, can be dated to the mid-1970s. This was also a watershed decade when the first generation of young people who had never experienced colonial domination came of age in the Muslim world. For some it would be later, for some it had been earlier, but the mid-1970s is I think a fair average. That is, this young generation had no memory of colonial yoke, and therefore they held the rulers of the Muslim world accountable for what they delivered or what they considered those rulers did not deliver in terms of goods, socially, in terms of the economy, in terms of political pluralism, and so on and so forth. Also, this was a decade that saw a massive change in demographics in this part of the world. Dehydrated milk, antibiotics were spread out elsewhere, and people didn't change their behavior, their familial behavior, if I may say so, for lack of a euphemism in English that I would know to mention that. And 10 years before, 20 years before, they would have 10 children and 2 would survive. Now they would have 10 children and 8 or 10 would survive. This was a part of the world that was mainly rural. People lived and survived in the countryside. When they became so numerous, they had to flee to the big cities, and not to the urban centers, but to the peripheries of the big cities, where people would live in shanty towns, in shacks, and they would create a new population that was not rural anymore, that was not following the teachings of the brotherhoods, of the rural Sufi orders, of the spiritual Islam, if you wish, that from time immemorial had dealt with issues of water, of fields, of disputes between families and the like. And they suddenly were thrown into this new world of the urban peripheries, where the traditional Islam of spirituality was unfit to deal with developers, with police, with mafia, and the like. And so this sort of lost generation that was displaced, massively displaced, and which changed significantly the geography of this part of the world, because until the mid-1970s, most people lived in the countryside. Afterwards, they would mainly live in the cities and in their peripheries. This new generation also underwent a major change. It was the first generation that became literate, massively literate, mainly for boys. Girls would follow suit a little later. And it would become literate in the language, in the official language of the country, in modern Arabic, in modern Turkish, in modern what have you, Urdu or Farsi. Languages that had been recreated or revamped by the ruling elites in order to ascertain their own power after the demise of the colonial powers. As Benedict Anderson has it in Imagined Communities, I mean, the written language is a major tool for power to establish a nationhood that it controls. So you had this new educated or literate generation, high school level, that was not pleased with its situation, that was not pleased with the rulers, that was literate, and that instead of using its literacy to receive passively the message coming from the top, from the rulers, about order, about socialism, about whatever ideology the rulers of the time would like to spread, this new generation was able to use those skills in written language in order, and reading language, in order to read, understand, and put into practice the revolutionary message that the most radical ideologues and leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood, namely someone like Sayyid Qutb, right, Qotb, in Egypt, had written. Those people explained to whoever would listen that the world was not really Muslim anymore, even in Muslim countries, that rulers had betrayed Islam, that they were actually parallel to the rulers that reigned in the Arabian Peninsula before the advent of Islam, what is known in Muslim parlance as Jahiliyyah, or the age of ignorance or of barbarity, if you wish. And that just like the Prophet had destroyed this world of paganism and built Islam on its ruins, the new vanguard, the new Quranic, as he calls it, Quranic generation of the 20th century had to destroy this old world and build a new Islamic world on its ruins. And if you listen to that, I mean, it echoes to some extent a Marxist message, but and it was not without the influence of this sort of a revolutionary model, but it was not at all. It was very anti-communist, anti-Marxist, which was considered atheist, and this is a major sin. But nevertheless, it was a message that was able to convey both an aspiration at the toppling of the social hierarchies on the one hand, and also, by the same token, as is the case with all religions, or most religions, at least all the religions I know, it also conveyed the possibility of reorganizing social order in order to topple the order that be, the powers that be, and also to reorganize a strong and abiding social order for tomorrow. And so this upsurge of Islam on the political scene had a dual dimension. One that was radical, that would manifest itself, at least in the Sunni world, with the strong opposition to not only to Nasser in Egypt, but then after a brief honeymoon to Sadat's policy of peace with Israel, and that would lead ultimately to the assassination of Sadat by Muslim radical, by Islamist radicals, whether or not they did that entirely on their own, whether some people turned a blind eye on the fact that a young military officer was allowed to get in a parade where the chief of state was present with weapons and cartridges. This is something that one day the archives may let us know. But whoever was behind the assassination of Sadat, anyway, it was implemented by the name of Islamist radicals and in the name of Jihad, and the organization that killed him called itself Tanzim al-Jihad, the Jihad organization. That's on the radical side. And on the other hand, in the 1970s, the 1970s witnessed the development of a much more conservative dimension of Islam that was much closer to Western interests and to American interests in particular, an Islam that was dear also to the Brits, that had to a large extent helped it emerge. That is the Wahhabi Islam of Saudi Arabia. And both of them were very much present in the 1970s. The first important issue was that it came, Islam, whatever it was, came center stage, i.e., until the mid-1970s, nationalism, whether it be liberal, socialist, traditional, what have you, was a central issue. There was no such thing as an organization of the Islamic Conference, no such thing as Muslim World League. It was only created in 1962, and so on and so forth. And people would not systematically start there. If I were in Egypt, if I were a Muslim, I would have been compelled socially today to start my talk with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the Merciful, the Misericordious, something which did not exist under Nasser's time. Under Nasser's time, the laws were made Bism Sha'ab, in the name of the people. Now, there again, it's in the name of God, and so on and so forth. And so Islam moved center stage for a number of reasons, one being that there was this kind of pressure from the young generation, that, and particularly the young, educated, sort of hopeless generation that saw no future in a system of education that led nowhere to a large extent, and also because you had this very significant impact of conservative Islam that manifested itself very strongly on the occasion of the October War of 1973. 1973 was a very significant event. As you know, the Arabs had been defeated in June of 1967 in the Six-Day War. Nasser's legitimacy was in shambles, And then Arab governments, mostly the Egyptian and the Syrian governments, had to retaliate. And in order to save, to have a face saving in front of their populations that did not elect them because they were autocratic rulers, they had to launch an offensive against Israel that would at least look like it was victorious, or at least they would have to take the initiative. And so in October of 73, they launched this initiative, which is this war. The October War is the secular name for it. It's often called the Kippur War because it caught the Israelis unawares because it was Yom Kippur. And but the most important way of calling it, probably, or the most significant, is the Ramadan War, because it took place during the fasting month of Ramadan. And what did that mean? It meant that in order for Muslim soldiers to fight and not to fast during Ramadan, then jihad has to be proclaimed. Now, what is jihad, and who proclaims it, and who is allowed to do so? Jihad in Arabic comes from a root. Most Arabic words are organized around three main letters or roots, which is JHD, something that means effort or striving. And jihad originally means the effort to be better, for effort for good, effort to be a good Muslim, not to drink, not to whatever, not to be attracted by your basic instincts, if I may say so. And so this is the jihad of the soul that everybody is supposed to implement in his daily life. Then you have a social and political jihad, which is translated into military action. A jihad which, if you wish, could be understood as a sort of crusade in reverse. Two kinds of jihad of that sort. One, the jihad of expansion, something which was the main drive behind the expansion of the Arab Empire in order to open, as they say in Arabic, fath, new territories to Islam. And this is not compulsory. This is something that volunteers or the army does under the guidance of the Caliph. And then another type of jihad, which is compulsory for everybody in the Muslim world, is the defense jihad, i.e. when the land of Islam is occupied by infidels, then everybody has to fight jihad, whether it be by the sword, if he can afford it, if he can't fight with money, and if he can neither fight nor pay, he can at least pray. So it's either by the hand, by the tongue, or by the heart. Now, who is allowed to say, let's fight jihad? Because it's a very complicated issue, because as you understand, jihad comes supreme and overcomes everything else. You don't have to fast, you don't even have to pray. You have to mobilize to save the Muslim community, because you can always pray and fast. If this is to be done at the expense of the survival of the community, then it's needless, which is something that shows you how, in a way, how plastic Islam is as a doctrine. People see it as as totally fixed, and it is not. It's something that can adapt and adjust very often. And so, when who is entitled? Who is authorized, if I may say so? It's a very complicated issue, because you always know when jihad starts, but it's very difficult to know when it ends. And so in the good old days, before the internet, before Twitter, and when few people read books, and when the ones who read had the authority to tell the others what they had to do, the good old time when the professors were well paid, and the ulemas also, the Muslim scholars. The ones who were in the know, i.e. the ones who could read the sacred text and interpret it, who were sort of recognized by their peers as scholars, as Islamic scholars, knew, or they could discern when and how to call for jihad. The problem being that if jihad was used indistinctly, then it proved to be a two-edged sword, and it could turn against those who had started using it, particularly on the domestic scene. For instance, if you call for jihad against an unjust ruler or a ruler who was not Muslim enough, then it might backlash and lead to the opposite of jihad, i.e. fitna. Fitna means division, internal strife that makes of the world of Islam an easy prey for its enemies. This was in the good old days. Nowadays, everybody can call for jihad. Arn, Mick, myself, we can call for jihad at ideas, and I may actually think about it if you still insist on my drinking South African wine, and which is I take as a personal insult. And hope there are no South Africans in the room. I have nothing against South Africa. No, it's not. I'm a man of tradition, and a chauvinist. And this is a difficult issue. In 1973, the Mufti, or the Grand Mufti of the Republic of Egypt, who's an appointee of Sadat, called for jihad. Hence, Muslim soldiers fought, and they crossed the Suez Canal in the name of Allahu Akbar, God is the greatest. They managed to cross the canal, and the Syrians also managed to reclaim parts of the Golden Heights that Israel had occupied in 1967. And then, thanks to the U.S. airlift to Lod Airport and to airports in Israel, the Israelis were able to launch a counteroffensive to cross the canal back, and they stopped on the Suez-Cairo road, 101 kilometers from Cairo. Militarily, Cairo was open, but there was a major pressure that came from oil-exporting countries that decreed the embargo on hydrocarbons against all allies of Israel, which sent the oil prices skyrocketing, and which made of Saudi Arabia and its allies, but mainly of King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, the biggest producer and the one who had taken the initiative, the key player in the Middle East. So there you had a very strong, conservative Islamic kingdom that was becoming the key player, that was staunchly anti-communist, but that had not hesitated using the oil weapon against America, its ally, but the Saudis thought that America had betrayed them because they had been far too far in favor of Israel. Simultaneously, you had all those radical developments in Egypt, which the Saudis were worried about, even though they sent a lot of money to Egypt to build mosques, to read Qurans, and so on and so forth, hoping that they would sort of flood this Islamist movement with their money, and that they would sort of make them more conservative than they were socially. But the big surprise came not from within the Sunni world, but from the Shia world in Iran, where in 1979, as you know, 78 and 79, the Islamic Revolution took place. An Islamic revolution which had very strong, and still has, if we listen to Ahmadinejad, revolutionary and third worldist overtones, as opposed to the Saudis, who were strong allies of the West in their own way. The Iranian revolutionaries were very much anti-American. Marg bar America, death to America, the great Satan, was the favorite slogan. And not only was Iran anti-American, but it was also very strongly anti-Saudi. And it considered that the petromonarchies of the Arabian Peninsula were lackeys of the West, that the Saudi monarchs stopped worshipping Allah, but they worshipped the dollar and the barrel of oil, and that they had to be wiped away by an Islamic revolution on Saudi soil, something which did not make the Saudis particularly happy. That was one major problem in the Gulf area. So while in 1979, on the Levant front, U.S. interests seemed to be protected because Anwar al-Sadat had gone to Israel and had signed a peace treaty, which meant that the Israelis felt safe, and Sadat had sold peace at a very, very expensive price to Jimmy Carter. That is to say that he got a tremendous amount of U.S. aid in order for Egypt not to fight against Israel, which allowed for the Egyptian regime to survive in the face of this huge demographic explosion and the huge challenges that do not make Egypt viable today. While the U.S. thought that things were okay on the Israeli-Arab front, then everything exploded in the Gulf, with Iran turning revolutionary, and with Saddam Hussein, who was at the time the best friend of the West, declaring war on Iran in September 1980. Now, Saddam Hussein waged war on Iran because he was convinced that the country was in deep turmoil and that he could benefit from this havoc in order to widen its shoreline on the Gulf, on the Persian Gulf. Iraq has only 46 kilometers of coast. And also because all Gulf countries pushed him to attack Iran because they were absolutely panic-stricken at the idea that Iran would develop its activities against them. At the time, the best friends of Saddam Hussein were Dick Cheney, who was not vice president of the U.S. He was unofficial ambassador, and a famous French politician whose name I will not tell you, but that rhymes with Iraq. And then there was this feeling that the whole Western system of alliances was in danger. All the more so as in the Christmas of 1979, the Red Army invaded Afghanistan. Why did they do so? Not so much that they wanted to expand, as was believed at the time, but it was a sort of Prague coup, if you wish, in Central Asia. The year before, a pro-communist coup had taken place in Afghanistan. It had led to a political catastrophe for the Afghan CP. The whole country was in revolt, and then the Soviets felt that their allies would be ousted, so they sent a new leadership of the CP that came from Moscow. They got rid of the old one, executed them, and then the Soviet troops were there to ensure that this country would be in the fold of the Soviet system, and As you know, Afghanistan was the place for Kipling's. I'm feeling very British tonight. Kipling's Great Game, only that the USSR had replaced Imperial Russia, and the US had replaced Britain. Access to the warm seas was an important issue. Iran was in turmoil. The Iranian Communist Party was well represented in the beginning of the revolution in the governing bloc. And so this was perceived by many in President Carter's entourage, particularly by Zbigniew Brzezinski, and something that would then be developed by the Reagan administration as a golden opportunity. A golden opportunity to destroy the Soviet Union, to kill two birds with one stone. Get rid of the Soviet Union through a proxy war led by Afghan mujahideen or jihad fighters who were, if I may say so, christened as freedom fighters by the US administration at the time, and also to get rid or to minimize very significantly the influence of Iran. Iran described itself as the key revolutionary Muslim country that was hostile to the West, and then the US and Saudi Arabia and the West in general were backing a movement in Afghanistan that would fan the embers of anti-communism, and that would show that radical Sunni Islam was able to defeat what was painted by the US and its local allies as Islam's worst enemies, i.e. communism. So the Afghan jihad was a case in point. It was, if you wish, it was the time when as I said in the introduction, when political Islam started to play this major role in international affairs. Things did not turn very well for the Red Army, particularly when the US started to equip Mujahideen Afghan fighters with Stinger ground-to-air missiles. The Soviet Air Force could not be airborne anymore. Their tanks that had been designed to cross the plains of Europe to the English Channel were totally useless in the 8,000 meters high peaks in Afghanistan, and therefore Gorbachev had no choice but to consider that a pullout. The interesting thing was that, well, we do know, everybody knows that the pullout took place in 1989, but very few people, I think, make the link with what would happen later, i.e. 11/9, something that would make you think of 9/11, 11/9 being the fall of the Berlin Wall. But I'm sure that most of you in this room do not remember the 15th of February, 1989. Am I mistaken? I'm not, right, because you all remember the day before, the 14th of February. Well, Valentine's Day. Well, true, but for the Brits it was a very important date. Do you remember what happened on the 14th of February 1989? Mick Cox will give you a pint of Irish beer, if you understand, with the ID's logo on it. Well, it was the Ayatollah's infamous fatwa to kill British citizen Salman Rushdie for the satanic verses. And why did he do that on Valentine's Day? Not that he fell in love with whoever, and he was sending valentines that way, a peculiar way, but because he understood that with the Soviet pullout, Sunni radicals and their Saudi, Kuwaiti, and American godfathers would take all the benefits in terms of the mobilization of Islam, and that Iran would lose in this same endeavor. And the Rushdie Fatwa was a means to demonstrate to the world that Iran, revolutionary Iran, was the defender, the herald and hero par excellence of Muslims who were mocked, ridiculed, despised, and whatever by the satanic verses, Britain, Mrs. Thatcher, and the whole world. And so this was the way he tried to, if you wish, he tried to answer, and he sort of hijacked the mobilization in Britain. You remember that a month before, on the 14th of January, it was the famous book burning in Bradford, and this was an interesting consequence of the jihad in Afghanistan. I.e., after that, Khomeini died, maybe of sorrow, in June of 1989, and until Ahmadinejad was elected in 2005. Yes, 2005. Then Iran sort of got back into realpolitik and was not very present on the revolutionary stage. That was one thing that, was extremely significant in the world system at the macro level, if I may say so. Now, something else took place also, which went unseen, unforeseen, and ununderstood maybe by U.S. and to some extent Saudi, but mainly U.S. backers of the jihad in Afghanistan. Together with the locals, or the natives, or the Afghan mujahideen, who belong to very different, not only walks of life, but walks of Islam, if I may say so, came to Afghanistan what we may call international brigades of jihadists. And, mujahideen and jihadists mean the same, except that mujahideen is an entirely Arabic name, whereas jihadist is something made on the jihad, out of a Latin suffix. But by jihadists, we usually mean non-Afghan jihad fighters, people coming from Egypt, from Birmingham, from Aubervilliers, from Algeria, from Pakistan, from Mindanao, and who would consider that the call for jihad was universal. It was not limited to Afghans, that all Muslims had to participate in it. And they would gather in Peshawar, and under the guidance of a number of radicalized Muslim brothers, such as someone called Abdallah Azzam, a Palestinian from Jenin, who would die in 1989, killed by another Afghan Islamic war chief. And those people had a different agenda. To them, the liberation of Afghanistan from Soviet yoke was only the first step to the restoration of Islam as they saw it. And they considered their political action as a replay, as a remake, if you wish, of the Prophet's jest. As the Prophet had destroyed the Sassanid Empire, or his armies had destroyed the Sassanid Empire, at the Battle of Ctesiphon, they had destroyed the Soviet Empire, because to their mind it was clear that it was thanks to them that the Soviet Empire had been destroyed. They just forgot about the Stinger missiles in this reasoning, generally speaking. And then they would turn against Byzantium, as the early Muslims had conquered the Byzantine provinces of the east, the southern and the eastern shores of the Mediterranean, and would finally conquer Constantinople in 1453. In this Weltanschauung, Byzantium was America, was the Twin Towers, if you want, or the Pentagon, or the Congress. And within those circles, so this sort of idea took shape that they should duplicate at first the Afghan Jihad, duplicate it in countries from which those people were coming. So at the time, right after the Soviet army had pulled out from Afghanistan, U.S. and the U.S. and the petro-monarchies started to be worried about those former freedom fighters. Now they were described as ugly or dirty terrorists, and funding was stopped. And it was perceived as something, without much importance. If you read Zbigniew Brzezinski's book, The Great Chessboard, he was the one who launched this idea of the proxy war against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, even though the Reagan administration reaped the benefits. Then he said, people would object to him, but you destroyed the Soviet system, but it introduced, this new kind of threat to the West, radical Islamism, and he would say, well, this has no importance. Those people were active as long as we paid them, but when we stop paying them, they will disappear from sight because they have no country to rely upon, and the only country they have is Iran. Iran was morally defeated, and so they did not pay much attention to what would happen in the 1990s. That is, the attempt by many of the veterans of the Afghan war, what would be called later the Arab Afghans in Arab countries, who came back home to sort of reenact the Afghan Jihad in their own countries. They considered that now Egypt, Algeria, Bosnia, and other countries were lands of Islam that were governed by an impious ruler, even if he pretended to be Muslim, and that they had to, as a vanguard, as the new Quranic generation, as the reenactment of the Prophet's generation, if you wish, they had to destroy the barbarian, the pre-Islamic state of Egypt, of Mubarak or of Shadli in Algeria or whoever, and to do what had succeeded so well in Afghanistan, i.e., establish an Islamic state. It did not succeed at all in Afghanistan, and this was what happened in the 1990s in Egypt, in Algeria, in Bosnia. Civil war ignited originally by those returnees from Afghanistan. Something which, in its turn, failed, and because they were unable to mobilize the masses as they had expected. And this failure, and this is something I will sum up very briefly because I mentioned it last time. This failure led to the fact that some people, such as Ayman al-Zawahiri, the supremo thinker of an ideologue of Al-Qaeda, considered that it was useless to waste one's time to fight against what he called the nearby enemy, but that what was important was to focus on the faraway enemy, and I quote here the title of one of my esteemed colleague, Fawaz Gergis's book, and to strike at America. And striking at America, in a way, was the achievement. It was the end of their dream, if you wish. As they had destroyed the Soviet Union, they would destroy, even symbolically, America. Well, they did not think that the destruction of the Twin Towers would destroy the whole American system, but it would be a major blow, and it would be something that would give courage to the Muslim masses, that would turn against their rulers and then engineer a vast mobilization of which they would be the leaders. Something that there again did not function, and to a large extent Iraq, which was the place where the radicals expected to reenact the Afghan Jihad, where they expected to mobilize Muslims against the American and British and whatever invasion of a land of Islam. This was the cemetery of their illusions, because instead of killing American and British soldiers, which they did, they mainly fought an intra-Muslim battle, and Sunnis would kill Shiites and vice versa, and then the famous jihad would turn into its opposite, fitna, i.e. internal strife. Nowadays, so to some extent, and the irony of history is that we're back to stage one. We're back to Afghanistan. When President Obama decided to, and mainly as far as I understand the American system under the influence of Vice President Biden, to go back to Afghanistan, his view was that the reason the war on terror failed was that President Bush Jr., instead of concentrating on the destruction of the terrorist networks of Al-Qaeda, and after he had wiped out the Taliban government in 2001, in late 2001, had diverted its efforts against Iraq, and with the false pretext of the weapons of mass destruction, which is well known in this country, then had sent troops to Iraq, where he waged this war against Saddam Hussein with an entirely different agenda, i.e. reshuffling the Middle East. Saddam there were many things that could be said against Saddam, that he was not behind Al-Qaeda. And then Obama and Biden believed that what was to be done in order to secure the pullout from Iraq and to win the victory, to win the war against terrorism and not against terror, was to destroy what remained of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Hence, the choice to focus against the Al-Qaeda people, the few hundreds of Al-Qaeda people remaining in Afghanistan, which would allow him to say to his public opinion, we pulled out the troops from Iraq, but by the same token, we did not lose face. We destroyed the terrorists where Bush had failed because of the so-called war on terror. Well, the problem is that whatever remains of Al-Qaeda is protected by the revamped Taliban. And as opposed to Al-Qaeda, which are a tiny group of global revolutionaries, if you wish, with no grassroots and grassroots support, the Taliban have a major grassroots support. And this grassroots support has been clearly boosted by the failures of the Karzai government. And what is very striking is that we now see NATO forces to some extent in the position in which the Red Army was in the 1980s. You know, there again, the chicken, for some other term, are coming home to roost. Hence the centrality of this Afghan jihad issue, which is now being replayed against those who thought they were so wise that they could play it against their adversaries. With this, I will, with those deep thoughts about history and la ruse de l'histoire, I don't know how you say that in English, I will go back to our specialist of East-West relations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jill. We have about 20 minutes or so, a little bit more perhaps, if we stretch it for questions. Could I just start with a very brief question with regard to what happened in the early 2000s after the intervention in Iraq? Since we had the Iraq hearings getting underway, at least in the public forum today, it's a question that I think really should be asked on this occasion. The way I understood your analysis of Iraq was that this was a battle in which the Sunni Islamists engaged, but could never really get the upper hand, not just because it ended up in a fitna, but in a fitna that they lost, in a battle against other Muslims that they eventually lost to a coalition of Shia parties. What kind of impact do you think that had, particularly in the critical 2005-2006 period, on jihadists elsewhere? Was this something that was taken on board as part of their strategic thinking about how to further their own battles elsewhere? I'm thinking about the Sunni jihadists here. Or was it something that was seen simply as a reflection of the support that in their mind Iraqi Shias got from foreigners, from the foreign occupiers?
Let's put that into context. When the US and its allies invaded Iraq, one of the main issues on the agenda was that the Bush administration believed that they could not trust their Saudi ally anymore, because you had 15 out of the 19 hijackers who were from Saudi Arabia. They thought that the Saudis, the princes and the Washington and the New York and whatever Saudis could say whatever they wanted. It did not reflect, at best, reality, but probably they were cheating the Americans, and that they needed to find and to a new type of leadership in the region that they would mold out of the Iraqi opposition. An Iraqi opposition which was, because the majority of the population of Iraq is Shia, which was Shia. And this Shia Iraq, this Iraq that would be dominated by the Shias, by pro-Western Shias, would there again kill two birds with one stone. Not only undermine, if you wish, Sunni Arab domination of the Gulf and of the oil exporting world, because if the Iraq oil fields function full bloom, I mean this Saudi Arabia will not remain the swing producer of oil. And they also thought that by virtue of example, Iraqi Shia civil society would make their Iranian co-religionists believe that they could oust the Ayatollahs and have also a pro-Western Shia Iran. And it is true that if you go to Iran and if you talk to most people in northern Tehran, this Iran may be the place where America is the only place where America is popular in the Middle East, actually. And not in all of Iran, but amongst the well-to-do people. And so now this was perceived with a lot of anxiety in the petro-monarchies, and I have very little doubt that the insurgency in Iraq was encouraged by, I should say, petrodollars. And as long as the US did not make a deal in order to give Iraqi Sunnis their share, a fair share in government and in oil, then, you know, the insurgency would have gone on, and the so-called Sahwa movement, or the awakening movement, did not just take place because tribal chiefs suddenly disliked Al-Qaeda, or because suddenly they liked W. They were paid, and who pays in this part of the world? Not the wind or the birds or what have you. So this was part of the deal that would bring Saudi Arabia and the petro-monarchies back in the front line, which is now the case. I mean, clearly, and with a weak U.S. presidency, I think they feel they have no choice. Now Saudi Arabia is back on the front line as the key American ally. Now, in terms of the jihadists, within jihadist ideology, the fact that so much Muslim blood was shed started to be a real problem. Well, originally, I mean, Shia blood was worth nothing for the most doctrinaire of the Al-Qaeda ideologues. Shias are worse than Christians and Jews. But this is difficult to explain to your average Muslim worldwide, because the guy is called Muhammad and is killed by another Muhammad, and it's it's complicated, and many people have no idea in Muslim, they've never met a Shia. They're 15% of the world's Muslim population, so go to Africa, most people have no idea what a Shia is. They see Iraqis fighting each other, and they cannot all be pinpointed as stooges of America. And then you had these atrocities on video, on webcam, and on online, and little by little there was the feeling that that they were the Al-Qaeda leadership in Iraq, particularly Abu Musab al-Zarqawi and his inspirers, were really thirsty with blood, and that this was counterproductive in terms of political mobilization. And that led to the fact that a number of other radical Islamist ideologues started to attack Zawahiri and bin Laden for that. Now, to what extent were those ideologues helped or manipulated by this or that secret service of a number of Western countries? Everybody plays his own game in this, and no one should be naive, definitely. But this introduced an enormous amount of doubt, and this sort of leadership role that Al-Qaeda wanted to play. Obama now is in the back seat. It's Ahmadinejad who wants to be the real opposition to the West, and he has a state behind him. It's not like the other who just had this fake Iraqi Islamic caliphate, which was just peanuts.
Thank you very much. It was very, very interesting. Other questions? Let us start right at the back in the white shirt over there, and I'll take one over there as well afterwards.
Thank you. To what extent do you think Al-Qaeda is inspired by what might be described as a Guevara strategy of
Inspired by what?
a Guevarist strategy.
Oh, yeah?
Che Guevara said famously in the 1960s, create 1, 2, 3 mini Vietnams in order to wear down the United States. To what extent do you think Al-Qaeda is following a strategy of trying to bog the Americans and their allies down in a whole series of wars in the way that Che Guevara sought to do in the 1960s?
Thank you very much. I'll take one more question over there, if that's all right with you.
Sure, no problem.
Good. Please, sir.
Yes. One idea is to divide Afghanistan into two countries, north and south, and to give Kabul to the south, which presumably would be quickly seized by the Taliban. Similarly, the northwest frontier should be allowed to secede from Pakistan, and it's likely it would join a Taliban-led South Afghanistan.
Okay,
So
could we have a quick response
what's your
to those?
map? North Afghanistan would join the northwest frontier province.
South Afghanistan, which obviously would seized by the Taliban.
Would be a Taliban enclave.
Yeah.
Okay.
Eastro kind of Pashtunistan
fine.
solution,
Okay,
I think,
fine.
is the idea here.
Okay, I got it. Okay, so Che Guevara, as some of you may know, his name, the V and B are the same in Spanish, and Guevara is Jbara from southern Lebanon originally, and belongs to the Mahjar, that is to say the Lebanese immigration to America. I don't know if Fawaz, you agree with that or think it's a legend. And so then you may think. And nowadays, you know, I just read in the train this morning that Hugo Chavez had celebrated Carlos, his compatriot Carlos, as the great revolutionary of our time. Carlos, who after who's a communist but who converted to Islam and then praised Ahmadinejad and others. And once I was on TV in France, and I said that Carlos was not a Marxist anymore. That he had converted to Islam. And much to my dismay, Carlos was watching me on TV from his cell in jail. So he wrote to me through his wife and lawyer, Isabelle Coutan-Perret, and said, you know, I know you, I follow your work, I read your books, and I value what you write, which made me sort of quiver, and said, what have I done? And he wrote to me, you know, you're not right. His name is Vladimir Ilyich, Ramirez Sanchez. And he said, no, I'm still a Marxist. I mean, I'm a Leninist, but nowadays Islam is the voice of the oppressed. So this genius whose name I bear is still my inspiration, and there is no contradiction. And Tarek Ramadan, whom I saw talked in this theater, and whose photograph figures prominently in the Hall of Fame, in between in the waiting room, in between whoever, the leaders of the world. I mean, I don't know why. I don't think I should not come back to LSC, probably, unless you put my photograph instead of his. This is your challenge. And Tarek Ramadan also, just like the Iranians, if you wish, have sort of mixed this sort of third worldism with Islamism, right? And in Iran, the man who did that was someone called Ali Shariati, the son of an Ayatollah, who came to France. For once, it's not the fault of the Brits. We are the culprits, but it's rare. It's usually your fault. And he was in France at the time of the Algerian War of Independence, socialized with the Algerians who were in France, and translated into Farsi the book by Franz Fanon, the Wretched of the Earth in English? Les Damnés de la Terre, The Wretched of the Earth?
Yes.
And where he translated the oppressed as mustadafin, that is to say, he translated a word that functioned in Marxist parlance into a word that functioned in Islamic parlance. Mustadafin is a Quranic term that means the ones who are humbled. And the oppressors, also belonging to Marxist parlance, it translated as mustakbirin, they say the arrogance, if you wish, the ones who think they're higher than they are or bigger than they are, and establishing a sort of linkage, of passage between two systems of thought, right, and establishing influence bridges. Now, then there is a sort of continuity, a vague continuity between all those movements who borrow from each other, but stating that Al-Qaeda is Guevarist by the book, if you wish, may be going a little too far. As of course it was Che Guevara, Carlos also coming from his Carlos calling from his jail again and saying no. Now, as far as the future of Afghanistan is concerned, when we know that the Brits are good at carving out countries, I'm not privy to any talk of having a sort of Talibanistan in the south, and then a northwest frontier province that would secede from Pakistan and be joined with the rest, because the Taliban are mainly Pashtun or Pathans, and the northwest frontier province, or NWFP, as the Brits, who created the Durand Line actually to carve out in between of the Pashtun lands, is also mainly Pashtun. So I do not think that the Durand Line could be erased, and if you carve out NWFP from Pakistan, then it's a catastrophe for Pakistan, and the military establishment of Pakistan would never accept it.
Any questions upstairs?
But who knows?
Yes, right at the back over there. Just keep your hands up. Anyone else, if there are questions up there? Please, go ahead.
I've heard of
excuse me, who's talking?
Yeah,
right at the back, up on the top.
Oh, sorry. Fine.
I've heard talk of jihadists.
Could you speak up? Because
I've heard talk of jihadists and mujahideen, and it sounds like you're saying they're like sole sort of fighters that travel countries. Could you give a stronger definition of what you believe they are and the demographic?
Mujahideen and jihadists?
Yeah, just in
Okay,
general.
wait, we'll take one more question then
Sure.
from down here, right at the front. Yep.
You talked a bit about the domestic exhibitions of jihad here in Britain, and I was just wondering what you thought were the domestic underlying causes, aside from what they're hearing from abroad, for young Muslim men in Britain getting involved in that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Good, two good questions.
But we'll deal with that more in detail during another of the lectures, right? That were imposed on me. The difference between mujahideen and jihadists and the demographics. Well, all jihadists call themselves mujahideen. It's the scholarly community that decided to call the Arabs who went to Afghanistan jihadists in order to differentiate them from the mujahideen, meaning that the mujahideen were coming out of the local community, that they were Afghans, and to some extent this answers your question, because the mujahideen had grassroots how to say they were socialized. I mean, they represented the community. This is the difference between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, if you wish. Nowadays we don't call the Taliban Mujahideen anymore, we call them the Taliban. But the Taliban call themselves Mujahideen because they are fighting jihad. This is the way they see what they are doing. They have access, they speak the language of the people, whereas the jihadists are a sort of foreign implant into a society, right? Or they see themselves as a small vanguard that is going to mobilize people. So in terms of jihadists, the groups involved in the organized things like Al-Qaeda and are not very numerous, I would say. You probably now, after repression and decades of being tracked, I would say a maximum by the thousands, which is very small, but which can be very dangerous when you have 1,000 people who plot together to bomb something. Now, one of the main debates on that in terroristology, and I'm not one of them, is it's what is called the Sageman versus Hoffman debate. Is it leaderless or leader-centered jihad? And as you know, and I was in the States last week, and the big thing in the U.S. press about this major in the U.S. Army, Major Malik Hassan, who had opened fire on 13 who had killed 13 soldiers and shouting Allahu Akbar, and we don't know for the time being. I mean, the evidence has not yet been given, and the trial has not started. But it seems that this person was into what is now being called self-radicalization, i.e., that the internet was the clue, and also his email relations with an Yemeni imam who spent most of his time in America. And so this is an interesting issue, because here you have an individual who's related via the internet to an ideologue who's he's never seen, and who decides on the way he will implement his action. Now, to what extent did this had to do with personal problems, or the fact that he thought he was fighting for a cause, for the time being, this is unknown. But it was a great shock to Americans that you had someone who had gotten up to the rank of major in the U.S. Army, and who would kill 13 soldiers in the name of religion. Even though many people may say no, and it was not in the name of religion, and most American Muslim associations published statements saying this man doesn't have anything to do with Islam, which was expected. But nevertheless, it was a major issue, particularly after the Obama Cairo speech, where anything Muslim was great, and because he had to say the opposite of what Bush had said, and to have a sort of big PR operation in the Muslim world, something which now is difficult to deal with with his constituency at home. In terms of what makes, to some extent I answered part of your question, except it was in America and not in Britain. If you allow me, I would rather keep it for, you'll have to come next time or the time after. When is it, Mick, we deal with? Say it again? The third session? Okay. The January lecture, so you'll have to be back in January, but we'll give you a special prize for that, and for your patience, and because it's a very complicated issue. I mean, I think we have to go sort of deeper into the elements of the change in immigration and the sociology of Muslim immigration into Western Europe, to try to understand what led to 7/7, for instance. How come we had the riots in the outskirts of Paris, and you didn't. So you had 7/7. We had no comparable terrorist plot at that time, and so on and so forth. I mean, I will bring water to this mill later on.
There will be 2 more lectures in Lent term in this series, to which you are all very, very welcome. LSE Ideas has its next event on Thursday this week, where we switch to another part of the world. We're dealing with the political situation in Thailand. That's at 6:30 over in Ideas on this coming Thursday. Let me ask you to join me in thanking Professor Keppel for another fascinating lecture. Thank you very much.